On the 9th of February 1997, 24-year-old Kevin McLeod was found dead in Wick Harbour, having suffered massive internal injuries. While the police quickly ruled his death a tragic accident, Kevin's family believed there had been foul play. 25 years later, after Kevin's family had battled with many different authorities every step of the way for answers to what happened to their son, a report following an independent review was published, which concluded whether Kevin's death had been an accident or not. But before I tell you what is in the report, I'm going to take you back to the fateful night Kevin McLeod lost his life and tell you about the horrendous experience Kevin's family have gone through for so long following losing their son Kevin. Will you agree at the end with the conclusion in the report? Kevin McLeod grew up in the town of Wick in Caithness, located in the far northeast of Scotland, a 24-minute drive south of John O'Groats. And John O'Groats, according to Wikipedia, lies on Great Britain's northeastern tip and is popular with tourists as one end of the longest distance between two inhabited points on the British mainland, with Land's End in the southwest of Great Britain being the other point. Kevin lived with his mum and dad, June and Hugh, and his two younger brothers, Andrew and Martin. Hugh's brother Alan, his wife Yvonne, and their children also lived in Wick, and the whole McLeod family were very close. Kevin worked as an electrician, and at the time of his death, he was engaged to be married. It was Friday the 7th of February 1997, and after a long working week, Kevin was out for the night with his friends, having a good few drinks and enjoying himself. But by the evening of Saturday the 8th of February, when Kevin's family and friends hadn't seen or heard from him since the night before, Kevin's dad called the police to report him missing, and a search, which included the police, the Coast Guard and a lifeboat, took place. However, the weather through the night was horrendous, and it was deemed too dangerous for the search to continue, and so it was called off at 1 a.m, although Kevin's family continued to search until 5 a.m. in the morning. However, sadly, they didn't find Kevin. The search for Kevin began again at first light, and a local man who was a diver was also asked to search the harbour, and sadly, at 11 a.m. on Sunday the 9th of February, the diver found Kevin's body in the harbour. A post-mortem was carried out the following day, and this revealed injuries to Kevin's lower chest and abdomen and catastrophic internal injuries, including a burst liver and internal bleeding. However, the pathologist concluded that Kevin had died from drowning, going on to state that Kevin's catastrophic abdominal injuries were consistent with him falling on an object such as the bollards found at Wick Harbour. Kevin's grieving and shocked family were told the pathologist's findings by the police, who told the family that they had deemed Kevin's injuries as not suspicious and told them that it was just a tragic accident, saying, according to an article in the BBC News on the 5th of November 2019, that his injuries had been caused by either him falling onto a bollard, falling onto a part of a berthed boat, or falling onto a boat's fishing creels, which is like a basket that is dropped over the side of a boat to the seabed to catch prawns, lobsters or crabs, before ultimately ending up in the water. However, Kevin's family just had a feeling, felt there was more to this than was being disclosed, and they were not happy to accept their son's death was just a tragic accident. They felt he had been murdered, and that this was how his severe injuries were sustained, which was only confirmed in the eyes of Kevin's family when it was discovered 5 months later that Kevin had had an altercation with someone whilst on his night out. However, by the time the altercation was discovered, the relationship between the police and Kevin's family was severely fractured, as the police had been absolutely unwilling to even consider that Kevin's death had been anything other than a tragic accident. The police had been completely dismissive of Kevin's family's feelings, opinions, or requests for them to carry out another review of Kevin's case, or even carry out a first investigation of Kevin's case, as it turned out that the police had not even attempted to carry out even basic policing procedures, such as speaking to any witnesses, speaking to Kevin's friends he was on the night out with, carrying out any door-to-door inquiries to find out if anyone who lived nearby had heard anything, or even gather any evidence that might have been in the area that could have supported Kevin's death being either an accident or if there had been foul play. But even worse than this, As the police were steadfast in their belief that Kevin's death was an accident, despite the ongoing pressure by Kevin's family to review his death again, as well as something which wasn't officially disclosed until 20 years later, the police not only didn't collect Kevin's clothing for examination, they destroyed them. They were steadfast in their belief that it was an accident and refused to budge, despite the obvious distress and pleas by Kevin's family. However, when it was discovered that Kevin had had an altercation with someone on the very night he died, and following Kevin's family writing letters to whoever they could to try to get their son's case looked at again, or properly, the police were ordered to carry out another investigation. However, they again came to the same conclusion. Kevin's death had been a tragic accident. Again, not satisfied that the police were correct in their conclusion, Kevin's family finally managed to get a fatal accident inquiry into their son's death in 1998, where more than 100 witnesses were interviewed in a bid to trace Kevin's final movements that evening. However, by this time, many months had passed, therefore there would be no way of collecting evidence there might have been, and Kevin's clothing had been destroyed. Although upon trying to find out who had done this and who had given the order, nobody appeared to have that answer. It was a mystery. At the result of the fatal accident inquiry in September 1998, the inquiry sheriff criticised the police investigation, concluding that from the initial investigation, the police had not established whether the very serious abdominal injuries had been as a result of an assault, with the sheriff saying that this remained a possibility. Sadly, due to the lack of evidence and the substandard police work done, the fatal accident inquiry recorded an open verdict, as it just couldn't be determined either way what had happened to Kevin. Would this have been good enough for you if it had been your loved one? Well, it certainly wasn't for Kevin's family, and so they continued to fight for justice for their son, continued to fight to have his death investigated as a murder, continued to send letters criticising Northern Constabulary officers' handling of their son Kevin's death, and asking for it to be reinvestigated, all while grieving for the loss of their son and facing nothing but resistance from the authorities they always thought were there to ensure the right thing was done. Frustratingly, it wouldn't be until April 2000, almost 2 years after the open verdict at the fatal accident inquiry, before Northern Constabulary, the name of the police force handling Kevin's death at the time, were asked to review the marks that had been found during the post-mortem on Kevin's lower chest and abdomen. However, after a year and a half of reviewing this and enlisting experts for their opinions, a report was issued in October 2001 that said, according to the BBC News, on the 5th of November 2019, it was believed that the marks suggested that Kevin had fallen onto creels on a boat berthed at the harbour. However, the McLeod family would not be told of these findings until March 2002, a frustrating 5 years after Kevin's death. And it only told them exactly the same as the police had shortly after Kevin's post-mortem back in February 1997, following them doing absolutely no investigation into his death. Again, Kevin's family were not satisfied with this, feeling there was more to Kevin's death, feeling that his death should have been treated as a potential murder and investigated accordingly, something which the family would find out many years later had also been the view of another. But this was kept a secret for now. Also in 2002, following the many letters of complaint the McLeod family had written about the Northern Constabulary police officers' handling of their son's death, asking why their son's death had not been treated as a potential murder and investigated accordingly, and asking why their son's clothing had not been collected and examined, a secret review was carried out by Central Scotland Police Chief Constable Andrew Cameron of Northern Constabulary's handling of the case. A report following this review was produced in 2002, however it didn't come to light until 2007, and it addressed the non-collection and destruction of Kevin's clothing, saying, according to the Press and Journal on the 13th of February 2021, that despite all of the officers who had been connected with Kevin's clothing being interviewed, the inquiry had failed to establish where, when and by whom the clothing of the deceased was destroyed. So, like I said earlier, it was a mystery. The report went on to say that Northern Constabulary had erred significantly by destroying the clothing in circumstances which clearly warranted its retention, particularly when the investigation was to be upgraded to the equivalent of a murder inquiry, saying that it was inexplicable why the police had not seized, retained, and submitted Kevin's clothing for examination. What is interesting about this report is that it says that Kevin's death was to be upgraded to the equivalent of a murder inquiry. Was it? By who? The family had never been told this, and this report wasn't made public until 2007, with parts being redacted when it was published. But I'll come back to this later. But it clearly wasn't just Kevin's family who had thought there was perhaps more to Kevin's death than just being a tragic accident. It certainly warranted a much more detailed investigation than Northern Constabulary had done at the time. Now, I mentioned that Kevin's family had been consistently writing complaint letters about Northern Constabulary's handling of their son's death, with them having lodged 60 complaints against Northern Constabulary by March 2003. And while I don't know exactly what was said in these letters, but bearing in mind they were grieving, were completely frustrated at the handling of their son's death, were getting absolutely nowhere with Northern Constabulary, and according to the Sun newspaper in February 2017, Kevin's relatives had accused police of being involved in an institutional cover-up. I can only imagine the letters were not positive. However, the McLeod family had devastatingly lost their son. There had not been a proper investigation in their eyes. They believed he'd been murdered, and that this and they were being ignored. They deserved to have their concerns and complaints dealt with in a professional and respectful manner. However, again, the McLeod family were severely let down. In February 2003, a report into the handling of the McLeod family's complaints was produced following an investigation, with the result being that the then Deputy Chief Constable of Northern Constabulary, Keith Cullen, faced disciplinary action, as the responses and handling of the complaints were deemed unacceptable. Finally, a small victory for the McLeod family. Finally, someone was seeing how poorly they had and were being treated. However, the following month, again, they were let down as it was announced that Deputy Chief Constable Keith Cullen had retired and the police board had ruled that he could no longer face a disciplinary action. Very convenient. But the family still weren't ready to stop fighting to get justice for their son Kevin. And so according to the BBC News in March 2003, they said they would be asking the British Prime Minister at the time, Tony Blair, for help. And if he couldn't help them, they would then take their case to the European Court of Human Rights. They would not be giving up their fight. Then things go quiet for the next few years, and presumably the McLeod family had no success in getting justice from the above avenues. But then in 2007, there's another flurry of activity when two separate reviews of Northern Constabulary's handling of Kevin McLeod's death and the handling of the McLeod family's complaint letters are produced. The first review to come to the McLeod family's attention was the secret one that was carried out in 2002 by the then Central Scotland Police Chief Constable Andrew Cameron, that the family had somehow found out about and had requested to see it through the Freedom of Information Act. Apparently, due to data protection, the full report was never released. However, what was released definitely told of not only just how badly the McLeod family had been treated by Northern Constabulary, but also just how poor Northern Constabulary's general police policies and procedures were. According to the BBC News in February 2007, the report said that procedures which were implemented by Northern Constabulary in relation to the initial search of Kevin McLeod's body following his death should be considered inappropriate, and that their failing to seize, retain and submit the clothing worn by Kevin at the time of his death for further examination remains inexplicable. However, Chief Constable Cameron went on to say that the force had undertaken much good work to improve the quality of its investigatory response. He also stated in this report in 2002 that Kevin McLeod's family were entitled to an apology over the patent lack of communication in respect of their complaints. Although up to 2007, Kevin's family had not received an apology from anyone, And following this secret report coming to light, the McLeod family called for Northern Constabulary's Chief Constable Ian Latimer to resign. However, instead, Chief Constable Latimer made a statement in which he conceded that some complaints made against his officers could have been handled more professionally and that lessons had been learned. However, went on to say that his officers had been subject to a series of allegations which, upon investigation, did not have any credibility. I can only imagine what was in the complaint letters from the McLeod family regarding Ian Latimer's Northern Constabulary officers, but as to what was said to the McLeod family in response, before Northern Constabulary clearly stopped communicating with the McLeod family, is anyone's guess. However, following the McLeod family sending a complaint letter to the Police Complaints Commissioner for Scotland, again about Northern Constabulary's handling of their son's death and their handling of the complaint letter sent to them by Kevin's family, and following a review being completed by the Police Complaints Commissioner for Scotland and a very critical report being produced in December 2007, we get a wee insight into just how badly Kevin's family had obviously been treated by Northern Constabulary, with the report describing how the force had behaved with institutional arrogance. With the report going on to say, according to the BBC News on the 19th of December 2007, that the service provided by Northern Constabulary to the McLeod family fell well short of the mark, with it appearing at times that Northern Constabulary had lost sight of the fact that it was dealing with a bereaved family who were looking for answers to difficult questions. The report also did criticise the McLeod family for the tone in some of the complaint letters to Northern Constabulary, but said that Northern Constabulary's attitude towards the McLeod family was on occasion influenced by personal feeling rather than professional judgment. The report concluded by ordering Chief Constable Ian Latimer to apologise to the McLeod family, which he did go on to give an unreserved apology for his force's failings at a face-to-face meeting in December 2007, with Kevin's uncle Alan saying afterwards that the meeting had been positive and open. Alan McLeod went on to say that while the family appreciated the apology, they would like Kevin's death to be reviewed by another force, something which Chief Constable Latimer apparently told the family he would consider and would be contacting the Crown Office to discuss the possibility. Apparently, it was also disclosed at this meeting that due to the failings in Kevin's case, the police had rewritten the Crime Management Handbook. So, all very positive. Great that they appear to have learned from their mistakes and had apologised. But hang on just one wee minute. What about the small fact that apparently Kevin's death was due to be upgraded to the equivalent of a murder inquiry? Was that true? And if so, who had made that decision and why? And had Northern Constabulary been told to do this and not done it, or had this instruction not made it to them? So many questions, and the McLeod family wanted to know the answers. However, it wouldn't be until 2017 that finally some of these questions would be answered, 10 years on from the family finding this out, and only because the McLeod family refused to give in, refused to give up getting justice for their son, as they still believed that he had been murdered, and were determined this was going to be looked into properly, especially after finding out that Kevin's case was supposed to have been a murder inquiry. And so again, the McLeod family sent a complaint letter to the PCCS, which is the Police Complaints Commissioner for Scotland, this time asking them to investigate the fact that their son's case apparently should have been a murder inquiry, and they wanted to know who had instructed this and why it hadn't been treated as such by Northern Constabulary. By the conclusion of this investigation in 2013, it had been uncovered that the apparent order to treat Kevin's death as a murder inquiry had come from the Procurator Fiscal in Wick, who was deceased by this time. However, according to the Daily Record in November 2019, the Crown Office had stated during the PCCS investigation that Kevin's death had never been considered a murder inquiry. So if the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service was denying that this had been the case, who had in fact given this order? Unfortunately, the PCCS had failed to find this out, and they had concluded their investigation in 2013, unable to give the McLeod family any answers. Northern Constabulary refused to comment on the most recent investigation into their involvement in Kevin's death and simply said, according to an article on BBC News in January 2013, that they had investigated all known evidence thoroughly and extensively and would be willing to examine any new evidence should it be presented. Then, in 2013, Police Scotland was formed, which, according to Wikipedia, it merged all police forces and specialist services of the Scottish Police in Scotland to create one national force called Police Scotland. So now Northern Constabulary was no more. Following the merger, Police Scotland were asked to investigate whether it had in fact been the case that a Procurator Fiscal had instructed Northern Constabulary to treat Kevin McLeod's death as a murder inquiry. It wouldn't be until 2017 until the answer to this would finally be revealed, which is when the next flurry of activity around Kevin's case began. I can kind of understand why it took Police Scotland 4 years to officially report their findings around if an instruction to treat Kevin's case as a possible murder was given, as they really had to be 100% sure the findings were correct, as it wasn't going to paint the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service in a particularly good light, as yes, despite the very same office denying that this was the case in 2012, in 2017, Police Scotland delivered the devastating blow that the Procurator Fiscal of Wick had in fact given this very order, but that Northern Constabulary had completely ignored it. According to the Daily Record newspaper, on the 14th of October 2019, the pathologist who carried out Kevin's post-mortem had been concerned enough about his severe injuries, despite coming to the conclusion that the marks on Kevin's body had been from him possibly falling on a bollard, that they had reported their findings to the Procurator Fiscal of Wick, who in turn instructed the pathologist to begin the post-mortem again, but this time in the presence of a second doctor, as apparently in Scotland 2 doctors are required for corroboration. The order was also given to Northern Constabulary to treat Kevin McLeod's death as a possible murder. But from the very outset of Kevin's body being found, for whatever reason, Northern Constabulary officers had made the decision that Kevin's death was a tragic accident, and from then they would not move from this viewpoint, completely ignoring an official order in the process. And even worse, despite having received the order to treat Kevin's death as a possible murder, the officers still made the decision to not only not collect Kevin's clothing to be examined, but to destroy it. Who was that, and why would they do this? It was Police Scotland's then Deputy Chief Constable Ian Livingston who had delivered this shocking news, saying, according to the John O'Groats Journal and Caithness Courier in December 2020, that the force fully accepted that an instruction had been given by the then Procurator Fiscal of Wick to treat Kevin's death as a murder and to investigate it accordingly, a matter which Northern Constabulary at that time failed to do. Deputy Chief Constable Livingston also sent the McLeod family a letter of apology, which read, "I apologise unreservedly for the policing response which followed the death of your son Kevin. It is unquestionable that since this tragic incident, numerous investigations and inquiries have substantiated your belief that there were serious and numerous failings on the part of Northern Constabulary in both the initial and subsequent investigations." He also met the McLeod family in person to give them a personal apology for Northern Constabulary's response to Kevin's death, stating that there had been serious failings on the part of Northern Constabulary, that officers had missed the opportunity to gather vital evidence, and that there was no doubt that basic policing procedures were never carried out. He also made a statement that read, according to the BBC News in December 2017, "The tragic events leading to the recovery of Kevin's body from Wick Harbour left Mr. and Mrs. McLeod with a 20-year search for answers. I can only imagine the pain and trauma their family has suffered, and I have nothing but the highest admiration for their strength and determination in seeking those answers. Legacy policing services undoubtedly failed this family, and I am further disappointed that their complaints were treated in a dismissive manner in the years which followed Kevin's death." A further comprehensive review of Kevin's case was carried out. However, Deputy Chief Constable Livingston said that, Police Scotland has come to the conclusion that, because of the initial police investigation failures and based upon the evidence now available, we are unable to present any evidence which would clearly indicate the circumstances surrounding the cause of Kevin's death, either criminally or accidentally, but that Police Scotland remain committed to considering any evidence which may come to light in the future. A further review of Kevin's case took place in 2007 by 6 detectives from the Specialist Crime Division, where witnesses were re-interviewed. However, following this review, it was concluded that the investigation could go no further, and they too agreed with the original verdict that Kevin's death had been accidental. And yet another review of Kevin's case was ordered to take place by the Chief Constable of Police Scotland, Phil Gormley, apparently following Kevin's mum, June, confronting him on a radio show. But I found this on Reddit, so not 100% sure if this was why the review was ordered, but a review was definitely ordered by Phil Gormley. But again, the outcome of this review would be unsatisfactory in the eyes of the McLeod family, who made a complaint to the PIRC, which is the Police Investigations and Review Commissioner, that the review didn't explain, as had been requested, why there had been a failure to treat Kevin's death as a murder. While the family accepted the apology from Deputy Chief Constable Livingston, Kevin's uncle Alan said that the family felt the failures by the police and the Crown Office to investigate Kevin's death as murder was gross criminal negligence, and that they had perverted the course of justice. All the family wanted, and have always wanted, is for Kevin's killer to be brought to justice, but also they feel the people who failed Kevin should be brought to account. At this point in 2017, Kevin's family have been looking for justice, answers, and to have Kevin's murder treated as a murder inquiry for 20 years. They should never have had to go through this, certainly not be stuck in the same place 20 years later, with Kevin's uncle Alan feeling that if the fact that the Procurator Fiscal had given the order to Northern Constabulary to treat Kevin's death as a possible murder had been disclosed at the time of the fatal accident inquiry in 1998, a year after Kevin's death, and not have been hidden and officially only coming out in 2017, then he doubts the family would still be searching for answers 20 years later. But it doesn't end there, because in 2018, not only are yet more reviews of Kevin's case carried out, but the police finally get that new information they were looking for. Will this information finally give Kevin's family the answers they have so desperately been fighting and searching for 20 long years? So in January 2018, following the McLeod family and the police making an appeal for anyone to come forward if they had any information about Kevin's death, a man came forward to Police Scotland saying that he did indeed have information about the night Kevin died, 21 years after Kevin's death. He told police that on the night of Kevin's death, he had been walking home near to the harbour, but on a raised area, when he had heard a commotion and a splash. When he went to investigate, he said he saw 2 police officers standing on the harbour looking down to where the splash had come from. The man said he must have made a noise, and the 2 policemen heard him, and one said to the other to get him, and so he ran away. But before he did, he noticed that the identification number worn on one of the police officers' shoulders read 1304. He said he was scared to come forward sooner, as the 2 policemen he saw were Northern Constabulary police officers, who also handled Kevin's death, and despite the merger in 2013, these same police officers still worked in the Wick area. It wouldn't be until April 2018 that a statement was made by Police Scotland saying that officers had spoken to the witness on 3 occasions, had taken a detailed and comprehensive statement, and that the information was currently subject to ongoing assessment, which had apparently resulted in further statements being taken from other people. May was another month when a flurry of activity took place, where Police Scotland again stated that they were actively investigating the new information that had been put forward. But also, the Lord Advocate, who is the Chief Legal Officer of the Scottish Government and the Crown in Scotland, who was at the time James Wolfe QC, instructed that an independent review be carried out by the criminal allegations against the Police Division of COPFS, which is the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service, to review the investigation carried out following the death of Kevin McLeod and to consider whether or not any further inquiries would be appropriate, according to the BBC in March 2019. Also in May, the result of the review by PIRC, the Police Investigations and Review Commissioner, into the review that had been ordered by Chief Constable Phil Gormley into whether it had investigated what it was supposed to, was published. By this time, reviews were just being carried out on reviews. However, the PIRC review, which had been carried out following the McLeod family's complaint, stated that the review that Phil Gormley had asked to be carried out did not look into why the decision by Northern Constabulary was made to ignore the order by the Procurator Fiscal to treat Kevin's death as a murder. According to the Scotsman newspaper in May 2018, the PIRC review report said, while the circumstances of the death have been reassessed, there is no specific information to suggest that the Legacy Force's alleged failure to carry out an instruction from the Crown had been examined. Going on to say that in light of the correspondence between the family and Police Scotland, it appears reasonable that the family had been given an expectation that all of their concerns would be taken into account and that all matters would be considered. However, the response to the application fails to provide adequate explanation as to why this specific concern was not addressed or investigated. In view of this, the PIRC upheld the complaint by the SPA, the Scottish Police Authority, by the McLeod family, and called on the SPA to explain to the McLeod family why Paul Gormley had not passed on this instruction to his officers carrying out the review. I mean, honestly, it's quite simple. The McLeod family quite rightly want to know why Northern Constabulary ignored a direct order by the Crown Office, and why the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service never followed up on this order, or ensured that the order had been adhered to, and instead had kept this information from the family, from the fatal accident inquiry, and from the public until Police Scotland finally revealed it to be the case in 2017. By this point, Kevin McLeod's family must be absolutely sick of banging their heads against a brick wall and getting no further forward, in just trying to find out what happened to their son, and if he was murdered, to see his killer caught. Ultimately, that's all they wanted from the start. Kevin's uncle Alan said in the Scotsman article that they are now waiting for the review to be completed that had been instructed by the Lord Advocate, and just hoped that it would finally expose the truth. Going on to say that those involved in what can only be described as one of the most shameful episodes in the history of policing and justice in Scotland should be held to account. The SPA, the Scottish Police Authority, said that they would carefully consider and address as required any recommendations made by the PIRC following the McLeod family's complaint being upheld. Then we're into 2019, which honestly is a bit of a roller coaster for the family again. Despite the flurry of activity in 2018, by March 2019, the McLeod family are concerned as things have gone quiet. The review that was ordered by the Lord Advocate was still ongoing and not looking to be concluded anytime soon, despite starting 10 months earlier. And despite the new witness coming forward and giving a statement in January 2018, 14 months earlier, and this information being sent to the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service in September 2018, 6 months earlier, there was no further movement with this either. And it would be another 4 months until the McLeod family would finally hear a major update, when at a meeting in July 2019 with the Crown Office's solicitor, they were told that the Crown Office had requested another review to be carried out, this time by an English police force, Merseyside Police. Not quite what the family were expecting, although welcomed it nonetheless, but they did ask the Crown Office solicitor why another review was going to be carried out when there was already an ongoing review being conducted by the Crown Office that had been instructed by the Lord Advocate, and the reply would shock the McLeod family again. The independent review by the English police force had been requested as apparently, according to the Scottish Daily Express in November 2021, the police were not providing all of the information expected by the Crown. So despite Police Scotland's apology and saying that lessons had been learned, they apparently now were refusing to hand over information that was required for the Crown Office to carry out a review of the handling of Kevin's case, which again added fuel to the McLeod family's theory that something was trying to be covered up. So, a bit bittersweet. A new review, this time from a completely independent source, being the English Merseyside Police, was great, but very disappointing for the family to find out that Police Scotland were still not prepared to fully cooperate to enable the Crown Office to carry out a complete review. But this wouldn't be the last time Police Scotland built the McLeod family's hopes up, only to dash them quickly afterwards. In the latter part of 2019, the McLeod family wrote to Sir Stephen House, who had been Police Scotland's first Chief Constable, although had since become Deputy Commissioner, and Ian Livingston had taken over as Chief Constable of Police Scotland. The family asked Sir Stephen House if, while he had been Chief Constable of Police Scotland, he had been made aware that Legacy Police Force, Northern Constabulary, had failed to act on the Procurator Fiscal's specific instruction to investigate Kevin's death as murder, with Sir House replying on Tuesday the 8th of October 2019, saying, according to the Daily Record on the 14th of October 2019, that "I do not recall the specifics of any conversation along the lines that you mention." He went on to say, "A system was set up in Police Scotland to review unsolved homicides, and I do remember several conversations about your son's murder." What? Wait a second, did he say murder? Did he just admit that Kevin's death had actually been a murder? The McLeod family were in shock, but also felt a huge relief, as finally, after more than 22 years of trying to find out the truth, of fighting so hard to get it recognised that Kevin's death should have been treated as a murder, there it was, there in black and white. However, only a few days later, they received a further letter from Sir Stephen House, and it read, "Further to my letter of the 8th of October, I understand my inadvertent reference to your son's tragic death as a murder may have introduced some uncertainty. My personal involvement in the case was limited, and I did not recollect that one of the ongoing issues was a difference of view between yourselves and those investigating the cause of your son's death." He went on to say that basically he was a busy man working in policing in London, and there were significant demands put upon him, and he just hadn't been as clear about Kevin's case as he perhaps should have been before replying. He finished his letter by saying how sorry he was for the McLeod family's loss and their ongoing grief. Just when they thought they had finally had a breakthrough, it was whipped away and they were back to square one. However, again, they picked themselves up and tried to focus on the positives, and in November 2019, they attended a meeting with the Merseyside Assistant Chief Constable and the head of Merseyside's Serious Crime Review Unit ahead of the Merseyside's force review of Kevin's case and the handling of it. The family wanted to ensure that they finally had the answers to their questions from the review. Questions like why the Northern Constabulary detectives ignored the Procurator Fiscal's order to investigate Kevin's death as a murder. Or like why did the Procurator Fiscal fail to ensure that his order was carried out by Northern Constabulary? Or why did the authorities fail to disclose this information until 20 years after Kevin's death? And why, after it was discovered that Northern Constabulary had failed to carry out the Procurator Fiscal's order to treat Kevin's death as a murder, was a murder investigation not launched? And also, what had the Procurator Fiscal seen or heard that had made him feel Kevin's death should be treated as a murder? The family had been fighting for answers for so many years, with Kevin's uncle Alan saying in a BBC News article in July 2019 that the last 22 years have been exhausting for the whole family. The family have only ever just wanted to have their questions answered, for their son's death to be reviewed as a murder and for his killer to be caught. And they had high hopes that finally, with the English Merseyside police force carrying out this full and comprehensive review, they would finally be given the answers they so desperately wanted. And so the review began, and the family waited, and waited, and waited. In February 2020, Merseyside Police asked for any witnesses who had information about the night Kevin had died and Kevin's death to come forward, with Kevin's uncle Alan also urging anyone with information to come forward, saying in the BBC News in 2020, "In the years since Kevin's death, people's circumstances, allegiances and lifestyles may have changed," and he asked them to search their conscience. But wait, hadn't a witness come forward in January 2018 with information about Kevin's death and how he had seen two policemen standing looking at something in the water after he had heard a splash? Yes, they did, but I'll get to that. In December 2020, 15 months since the start of the new review, Merseyside Police say that they have concluded their review and state that it would be presented to the Crown Office by February 2021. Alan said in the John O'Groats and Caithness Courier in December 2020, following Merseyside's review being concluded, that "We hope that those responsible for Kevin's death will finally be arrested once Crown Counsel has seen Merseyside's report, and that those officials who had clearly obstructed the course of justice will also be held accountable for their actions." However, February 2021 came and went, and according to the Press and Journal, in February 2021, the delay is due to an old-style cassette player being required in order for investigators to be able to transcribe evidence recorded at the fatal accident inquiry in 1998. With Merseyside Police stating they would be handing over their review findings to the Crown Office in February 2021, why are they only in February 2021 looking for a tape cassette so the old evidence can be transcribed? As Kevin's uncle Alan said in the Press and Journal article in February 2021, this issue should have been addressed prior to Merseyside beginning their inquiry, not at the end. He went on to say that if there is no form of justice or accountability after Merseyside's investigation, this will be a further scandal. He also said how difficult it was for the family to be patient given the years of pain and suffering they had endured, but that the family hoped and prayed that matters were finally coming to a head. Well, the family would have to be patient for a little bit longer, as Merseyside Police didn't actually hand over their findings to the Crown until the summer of 2021. In August 2021, it was reported that the current Lord Advocate, Dorothy Bain, and the Solicitor General, Ruth Charteris, would be meeting to discuss the Merseyside Police's review findings, and that they would endeavour to have a meeting with the McLeod family by the end of September 2021. At this time, Kevin's uncle Alan said in an article in the John O'Groats Journal and Caithness Courier that he hoped that the family would receive at least a summary of the report before the meeting in September, so they could absorb it and prepare any questions they had, saying that over the years they have been told so many lies and that reports they have asked for have been redacted to a level which had rendered them meaningless. They just hoped they would be allowed to see as much as possible of the Merseyside police officer's report. Alan went on to say that the police and the Crown should hang their heads in shame at the way they have treated them over the years. But he hoped, despite it being a very long and slow process, that finally it was coming to a successful conclusion. After he says the family's fight for justice for 25 years has left them drained mentally, financially and emotionally. Alan said that the family were extremely anxious about Merseyside Police's report, but they hoped it would provide the answers the family had been seeking for so many long years, and that justice and accountability would prevail in some way, as that was their only aim, to see justice for Kevin. Okay, are you ready to hear the outcome of the Merseyside report? Do you think the family's questions will be answered? Finally, the report was published in February 2022, and according to the Press and Journal, it was 357 pages long, with 1,300 sources being documented, and it concluded that it was highly unlikely Kevin had been murdered, and stated that he had drowned following an accidental fall, officially ruling Kevin's death as an accident, and it cleared police and prosecutors of criminality. After Kevin's family had a 25-year-long fight to try and get justice for Kevin, after many reviews were carried out, some done in secret, after discovering 20 years later that a direct order to carry out a murder inquiry had been ignored by police, after multiple apologies over the years for the wrongdoings of Northern Constabulary and Police Scotland, after the family having such high hopes for the Merseyside report and finally helping to get Kevin's death reviewed as a murder and possibly bring his killer to justice, Kevin's family are told it had all been for nothing, and Kevin's death had been a tragic accident. So let me tell you how and why the Merseyside police came to that conclusion. First, they felt it was highly unlikely Kevin had been attacked and murdered, as he was a man of good character with no known concerns or enemies. No one with a motive to end Kevin's life could be found, and the crew on a nearby fishing boat had heard no disturbance or struggle. And also, the last 2 people to have seen Kevin alive did not see anyone else in the vicinity. It was believed that Kevin was suffering the effects of the vast amount of beer and spirits he had drank that night, and this had had a detrimental effect on his ability to function properly, causing him to have fallen onto the deck of a fishing boat, with his catastrophic internal injuries being from the impact of him falling onto a fishing boat's deck and creel nets. One of the witnesses, who had been one of the last people to have seen Kevin that night, said that they had seen Kevin sitting on a curb at the quayside with his head in his hands and was unresponsive to queries about his welfare. Apparently, the curb where Kevin had been seen was determined to have been within yards of the edge of the quay where 2 fishing boats were berthed. It was surmised that at some point Kevin had stood up and made his way to the quayside edge, possibly intending to urinate as his jean buttons were found to be undone, and had fallen from a height onto one of the boats berthed there. Apparently the tide was low that evening, so the fishing boat would have been lower in the water, meaning that it was a greater height that Kevin fell onto the fishing boat deck and creel net. However, Kevin's family have insisted that Kevin couldn't have fallen onto a creel net, as apparently there were none on the fishing boat, the Aurora, at the time, and apparently it was thought Kevin had fallen onto the Aurora fishing boat, and not the other boat that was also berthed there that night. The Merseyside team did, however, concede in their report that they cannot discount the possibility that he may have been pushed from the quayside. So, are they thinking that the people to have seen Kevin last, who said he had been sitting unresponsive, could have been the ones to have possibly pushed him? As apparently the Merseyside police had concluded that there had been nobody else in the vicinity who could have harmed Kevin. They also addressed the statement given by the man who came forward in 2018, saying he had heard a splash at the harbour that evening and had seen 2 police officers watching something in the water before they saw him and gave chase. In the report, the Merseyside police conclude that this man had wasted 170 hours of detectives' time. The witness had apparently told police that in 1992, 5 years before Kevin's death, that he had seen a police officer attacking Kevin as another police officer looked on, and Kevin's supposed attackers had seen the witness at this time too. He said the very next day the same 2 police officers pulled him over in his car and arrested him for drink driving. He then said that these 2 same police officers were the 2 officers he had seen at the harbour in the final moments of Kevin's life. However, following looking into this statement in detail, Merseyside police said that the claims were bizarre, absurd, fabricated at all levels, and without credibility. The Merseyside police had found the drink driving arrest and traced the officers. However, neither police officer's identification number on the shoulder of their uniform had been 1304 as stated by the witness. But even worse, the Merseyside police found out that one of the police officers that the witness had said was there at the harbour the evening Kevin died in his police uniform didn't even become a police officer until 1999, 2 years after Kevin's death. The newspaper, the Press and Journal, tracked down this witness and told him what the Merseyside Police Review had concluded about his statement. The man was shocked and said, "Unless there's somebody that looks identical to him, then I don't know what to say. I can only say that if they don't believe me, then they're not believing the truth." This witness, as well as the Wick community as a whole, also came under fire in the Merseyside report, saying that they were to blame for such stories being made up by supposed witnesses, saying they were fueled in the main by rumour and conjecture, and blamed a number of local people for creating and sustaining controversy. It also criticised the police for allowing up to 7 unreliable witnesses to sustain suspicions of foul play over the years, and to approach Kevin's family with false allegations, causing them anxiety and leading to wasting police resources, without there being any repercussions such as arrest, interview and proceedings to court, and suggesting that this be in place for the future, as it was felt it was likely that further unreliable witnesses may come forward in the future, prolonging Kevin's family's heartache. The report said that alcohol dependency and abuse was a near constant theme among witnesses introducing allegations that Kevin was subject to severe beatings prior to his death. Merseyside Police also spoke with multiple leading pathologists and considered their opinions and theories regarding the marks displayed on Kevin's lower chest and abdomen and his internal injuries before concluding that there is no pathological evidence to support or specifically suggest any assault on Kevin, but instead their findings supported the scenario that Kevin had fallen onto the Aurora's fishing boat creels, impacting his lower chest and abdomen before falling into the water. This and his alcohol intoxication that evening may have contributed to his death by drowning. The markings on Kevin's lower chest and abdomen also matched images of the creel netting weave pattern when compared, which was indisputable evidence of how Kevin had come by severe injuries. The Merseyside Police report did state that Northern Constabulary had been ill-equipped and under-resourced at the time of Kevin's death in 1997, and also that there were multiple missed opportunities and that some most basic lines of inquiry had been overlooked. It did state that there was evidence of instances of potential misconduct, but those involved were either now retired or had passed away and sadly were no longer subject to disciplinary action, but concluded that there is no evidence that any police officer or Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service officials committed any criminal acts. According to the Press and Journal in February 2022, the report also incredulously criticised the then Deputy Chief Constable Ian Livingston for being persuaded to apologise to the McLeod family for the poor police response to their son's death. How on earth can that be criticised? Didn't the family deserve, at the very least, that apology? But this report has basically taken that away as being a good thing. Kevin's family are understandably upset over the findings in this report, as it has contradicted their long-held belief that their son was murdered. A former member of Scottish Parliament summed up what I was thinking in an article in the Press and Journal newspaper when she said that many questions about the case remain unanswered. Like, why did Northern Constabulary officers ignore the order to carry out a murder inquiry on Kevin's death by the Procurator Fiscal? Like, what was the reason for this order in the first place? What had the Procurator Fiscal's thinking been? Like, if Northern Constabulary were under-resourced at the time of Kevin's death, why didn't they ask for help from other police forces? Why were Kevin's clothes destroyed despite an ongoing investigation into his death, and after being given an order to conduct a murder inquiry? All good questions, but sadly, as the retired Member of Parliament said, it's almost too late now to find these answers out, and that any further investigations are unlikely to bring any more information forward. She feels the only thing left to do is accept the findings of the Merseyside report. But she feels the McLeod family will likely need support and help going forward, and that the powers that be should not only reflect on how the police failings have affected the McLeod family, but they should also do whatever they can to support the family. A Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service spokesperson said in the Press and Journal newspaper following the Merseyside report being published, "We appreciate the devastating impact the death of Kevin McLeod and the subsequent investigations have had on those closest to Kevin, and that the Crown has now considered Merseyside Police's detailed review of the case." Assistant Chief Constable of Police Scotland, John Hawkins, added that the thoughts of everyone at Police Scotland remain with Kevin's family and friends for the suffering they have endured searching for answers about his death. He went on to offer to meet with the McLeod family to discuss the review and repeat the unreserved apology for the past failings. I'm pleased he said that, because from how the Merseyside report was worded, it sounded like they felt the police should never have apologised to the family. And what about Kevin's family? Where do they go from here? Would you be happy with the Merseyside Police's findings and conclusions after a 25-year-long fight for answers? Well, according to the Press and Journal, in February 2022, Kevin's family were preparing a response for the Lord Advocate Dorothy Bain, who has offered to meet the McLeod family to discuss concerns. But there is no update as to whether this has taken place or what the McLeod family plan to do next, if anything.